Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt, with the first entry in an ongoing series about apocalyptic and dystopic storytelling in both literature and film. It's a pretty obvious commonplace to note that the older we get, the more obdurate we become, the more inflexible and set in our ways. It's not only our bodies that become stiff, but our minds. That prospect of personal, social, and political transformation, which so excited us in our college years, becomes far less appetizing once our adult lives have settled into a comfortable and familiar rhythm. The same might be said of cities and nations. The longer a particular social organism has existed, the harder it becomes to change it. Whether the issue at hand is a single individual's ingrained habits of dealing with stress, or those well-established social programs with which our government meets unemployment crises, one detached guy's tendency to treat romance as play and sexual partners as disposable, or his entire culture's objectification of women in social media, we tend to hold tightly to the unhealthy but familiar thing instead of taking a risk on the unknown. Better the rut in which we predictably run than an unknown path well off the beaten track. Such momentum explains, at least in part, why it has proven so difficult to consistently fund California's bullet train project, launched way back in 2008, or why the federal government continually fails to overhaul Social Security in any meaningful way, despite every president for over half a century saying we must do so to avoid fiscal calamity. It's why many of us give only lip service to the idea of owning fewer cars and embracing the inconvenient schedules of public transportation. It's why addicts have such difficulty kicking their habits. Criminals face high rates of recidivism, and serial abusers appear unable to recognize, let alone alter, their behavior. Quite often, it takes a crisis for significant, lasting change to truly begin. Like James Bond's martinis, we need to be shaken, not merely stirred. Sometimes, a small-scale, localized shaking involving only a few people is enough to catalyze change. A near-fatal overdose, the loss of a child, or the discovery of marital infidelity can jolt a family into reconsidering its current trajectory. Though catastrophic for those involved, however, such an isolated event will never force an about-face. Once anger wears off, panic subsides, or the edge of grief has been dulled by routine, we often snap back into old patterns, abandoning any tentative efforts at a reversal. In such cases, a more widespread cataclysm may be in order. In his book, Political Justice, written hastily in the months before war broke out between England and France, the Enlightenment philosopher William Godwin targets what he considers one of the worst injustices of his time: the inequality perpetuated by aristocracy. Writing at a time when many of his contemporaries feared that the blood shed during the French Revolution might flood British streets if they too overthrew their monarchy, Godwin boldly claims that, quote, royalty inevitably allies itself with vice. Monarchs, he alleges, are debauched from birth, seeking only those who will flatter their mistakes and put a varnish on their actions. Virtue is apparently unlikely to grow in an undemanding social environment. Quote, we need the winds to harden as much as the heat to cherish us. Many a mind that promised well in its outset has been found incapable to stand the test of perpetual indulgence and ease, without one shock to waken and one calamity to stop it in its smooth career. In the novel The Last Man, published in 1826, Godwin's daughter, Mary Shelley, provides an overview of the various kinds of transformations that may follow shocks and calamities of various magnitudes, events of both personal and global proportions. In so doing, Shelley provides an important template for many apocalyptic and dystopic stories that would follow her own. Some small-scale shifts in Shelley's novel prove temporary. Others last indefinitely. Well before a pandemic of unknown etiology descends on the planet and wipes out its human population, Shelley's characters face seismic events of a personal nature that provide the opportunity for enduring change. The narrator, Lionel Verney, grows up in poverty without a proper education and is, by his own account, as uncouth a savage as the wolf-bred founder of old Rome. I owned but one law, it was that of the strongest, and my greatest deed of virtue was never to submit. By his own account, Lionel's mind is in danger of degenerating into that which informs brute nature. He's on the verge of becoming an animal when he abruptly meets Adrian, a young man who models a very different sort of masculinity. Adrian's selflessness, optimism, and altruism inspire Lionel to abruptly change course. This, Lionel later concludes, is power, not to be strong of limb, hard of heart, ferocious and daring, but kind, compassionate, and soft. I also will become wise and good, Lionel declares, and then he weeps out loud. Lionel's transformation is profound and lasting, and it doesn't require anything more disruptive than meeting someone. I'm sure that many of us could supply a long list of novels and films that dramatize such personal change catalyzed by a mentoring relationship. We could also probably provide many examples of stories where romantic passion changes someone for the better, at least temporarily. This is the next type of transformation Shelley sketches as she draws together a power-hungry member of parliament who longs to rule the country and a misanthropic loner who prefers the fantasies conjured by her imagination to the emotional and social challenges of interacting with real people. Raymond manages to put his dreams of political celebrity on the back burner, and Perdita emerges from her shell just long enough for them to have a child and become indispensable members of a tightly knit group of friends. And then everything falls apart. The allure of power becomes too much for Raymond, and when he pursues the position of Lord Protector of England, a kind of prime minister, he also ends up breaking his marriage vows. Like her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, who argued in A Vindication of the Rights of Woman that relationships built on affection alone remain vulnerable to outside threats, Mary Shelley draws on her own experience with an unfaithful husband whom she adored in sketching this portrait of love's limitations. As noted earlier, sometimes an individual refuses to alter much of anything about themselves until a large-scale, inescapable, prolonged event forces some kind of metamorphosis. Events of this size may break a person, psychologically speaking, kill them outright, or provide a valuable, much-needed catalyst for change. Catastrophic events like economic recessions and depressions, world wars, natural disasters, and pandemics, like the bubonic plague of the 14th century, compel significant change. If folk hope to stay alive in such situations, they must abandon some of the rules that previously regulated their behavior and come up with new ways of doing life. I get really excited whenever I teach apocalyptic and dystopic stories, something I've been doing since 2009, the year the Great Recession began winding down. It's not that I'm morbid and enjoy thinking about suffering, but that these bleak narratives so often provide readers a helpful space for working through dilemmas they've already faced, as well as challenges they may confront in the future. Whether such tales magnify potential problems to a degree that seems wholly unlikely, or keep things grounded and familiar, they offer opportunities to exercise our imaginations and work through real-world difficulties. It's hard to imagine zombies ever coming into existence, but Robert Kirkman's graphic novel The Walking Dead prompts readers to re-examine common prejudices surrounding mental illness and crime, gender, and race. The chances of an alien invasion, like that described in H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, seem rather small, but the short novel does effectively dramatize the shell shock suffered by those facing overwhelming odds on the battlefield, helping the general reader understand the psychological costs of extreme warfare without bringing in details from an actual conflict, details that would complicate the picture for academics. By clothing his tale about trauma in the garb of science fiction, Wells arguably makes it easier for readers to focus on the psychological and sociological consequences of widespread violence without our getting distracted by questions about historical accuracy. Mary Shelley does something similar in The Last Man. She sets her tale about a virulent disease 150 years in her future, giving herself plenty of room for flexing her imagination as she envisions a world that changes for the better in some ways, even as it falls apart in others. Those of you who read Frankenstein back in high school may recall that in Shelley's first novel, Frankenstein isolates himself in his laboratory, stops writing letters and hanging out with friends, and allows scientific ardor to overwhelm those habits of exercise, rest, and good diet that others would have enforced if they'd been around. The result is an utter mental and physical breakdown that lasts months, during which time the lonely monster he created repeatedly faces society's rejection and becomes a bloodthirsty killer. In her third novel, Shelley once again underscores the importance of relational ties by picturing a human race that grows more interdependent and intimate as it shrinks. Some of the frenzied few behave poorly, of course, spending their final hours acting out violently, and others abandon their families to carouse at wild parties until death takes them. The militant-minded can't shake their habit of starting unnecessary conflicts, even with humanity's numbers dwindling rapidly, and the power-hungry manipulate others' religious beliefs to aggrandize themselves. For many in Shelley's novel, however, old prejudices built upon differences of race, class, age, and gender begin to dissolve, allowing new and vibrant relationships to form. Lovers, previously separated by money, find marriage within their reach once they inherit a legacy from deceased relatives. The young spring up to fill leadership positions abandoned by their elders, and a few experienced elderly women become de facto mayors of their townships. England erases old animosities, allowing desperate immigrants to flood over its borders and into makeshift housing created by aristocrats willing to clear-cut their forests to create more room. Such selflessness mushrooms when Adrian assumes the position of Lord Protector. His predecessors, who had all the traditional characteristics of a strong leader, like boldness and charisma, proved, shall we say, much less capable. When Raymond occupied this leadership position, his administration made wonderful plans to accelerate transportation, increase food production, and erase poverty, but he abandoned ship before completing any of his projects. Ryland, who came next, wished to redistribute wealth and erase the aristocracy, but then realized he had to toss his democratic goals out the window to gain the assistance of the wealthy after the plague struck. He also ultimately runs from his responsibilities, only to die alone in the wilderness. Adrian is the kind and compassionate leader the country now needs, one whose particular virtues were dismissed by a pre-plague society. Before the plague hit, Adrian's emotional sensitivity, what those in the period would have called his sensibility, made him a great friend but a horrible lover. When his beloved jilted him, he became clinically, nearly fatally deranged. Once England's population has dropped precipitously, however, he emerges as the perfect leader. Instead of ruling from a distance, he walks among the people, spending long days doing what he can to assist crowds of supplicants pleading for assistance, and fearlessly visits the dying in plague hospitals. When fruitless violence breaks out more than once, he risks his own life stepping into the midst of the conflict to stop the combatants, reminding them that every human life has become infinitely valuable. This is not mere rhetoric. He, Lionel, and the other heroes of the novel risk their own lives to seek out and protect those society has often cast aside, including the aged, the disabled, the impoverished, and the mentally ill. Someone recently asked me why I don't teach more utopic stories, films and novels that include a heavenly vision of an ideal existence either on this planet or another plane of existence. It's not that I reject the idea of paradise, I long for it, but that hope seems more compelling when juxtaposed against despair. What do you think? Have you benefited from reading or watching tales about a bleak existence or catastrophic event? Should there be a place reserved on everyone's shelf or electronic queue for dark tales that disturb as much as they inspire?